Well, I am here today to let you know. I did some writing today.
Good.
Finally.
Good job, Nell.
I know. It was like 300 words, but I feel it was 300 more than it was. So I see that as a victory. And then I also got some ideas for the other chapters that I wanted to do because I don't know about you. I can't go to bed or I can't do anything else until I've finished writing a chapter. Then Rose told me no, she only finished like half a chapter. And then the next day she continues with that chapter because then she has something to work from or work off of. If you have something you've already kind of worked on, then you can go from there.
I took a master class once that said, at the end of your writing session, write something down you want to do the next day. And I think that's smart of Rose if that's how she gets that done, where she just does half a scene.
Yeah.
But sometimes I can't leave a scene unfinished. I'll jot down what the next scenes I want or thoughts that came off of that scene of where I could go. So I'll open other documents in my Scrivener and be like, this one's going to be this scene that does this and this scene that does that. And so then the next day I just have to pick which one's exciting to me today.
So I just believe myself enough to be like, no, I'll remember what I wanted to do the next day. I'm breaking my tea trend today because I'm drinking coffee because I'm tired. So I'm like, no, I have to stay awake for a few more hours.
I'm doing apple cider. And it's warm and it feels so good on my throat.
Very nice, very nice. Alrighty, are we ready to get into this episode?
I'm so ready.
Hey ho, let's go. Hello everyone and welcome to Tea and Tales. I'm Madeline I Now.
And I'm Sarah Sampson. We want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in and for interacting with us on our social media. We especially want to thank the Shit About Writing podcast and Lucas March. Today's episode is about writing what you know. How do you write what you know? What does this phrase mean?
Right, but we also don't want to limit you to be like, no, you can only write what you know, because then you kind of don't grow as a writer. I've learned that by exploring different things while I'm writing has actually broadened my knowledge of things.
And sometimes you don't know what information that you have is going to be important to the novel. And so, in my opinion, over-researching is not a bad thing.
Never.
But to get into researching, you also have to start from where you are, start where you know what you already have in your mind, in your heart, because if you're not interested in it in any way, you're not going to be able to research it. You're not going to be able to bring out anything useful to your readers about it.
Very true. And also, I think each experience we have, we've formed a personal and emotional connection to it. And so that emotion you will bring to your writing and to your character development and your character arc, because you've experienced that feeling that you want your character to feel, or you've experienced a situation that you put your character in and you're like, haha, sucker, now you have to feel it as well.
And I'm going to put a little side note in here on this. If you're querying about the novel, you have to know what in that novel makes it your novel and that you're the writer to write it. Because when you write that paragraph about you, that author bio paragraph, you want to have something, even if it's just one line, about why this novel is a novel you had to write. I'm a fantasy writer, right? So almost everything's made up. In my Unicorn one, I've worked at different stables across the United States over many years. And so I put that in there. I have a love for horses. And because of that, I can write unicorns that seem like real creatures.
Fun fact. Did you know? Where's my chappy so I can open up? The national animal of Scotland is a unicorn.
I knew I liked Scotland for some reason. Well, now you found a really interesting article that we wanted to bring some of the points out of.
This one is an article that was in the Writer's Digest, and it was written by Natalie Simmons. So she is a multi-genre author, and this is an article she wrote about like do's and don'ts of writing what you know. So it's a guide to authentic and engaging writing. And so I thought it would be like a good idea for us to go through her list of things that she would recommend you do and things you don't recommend you do. And then, add a little of our own spice and commentary in there, because this podcast is all about. I will start with the first one. Okay, so the first one that she said is the do's. So it would be, do use personal insight and emotions, which I think is something we've kind of talked about already.
We just finished talking about personal insight and emotion because that's what makes it feel real to you as well. Like, if you're not making yourself laugh or cry or feel the feelings while you're writing, then it's harder to know if your audience is going to be feeling the emotions that you're trying to get them to feel. So yeah, put in that personal thought and emotion and philosophy, even if that's the style you go for.
But then it's also that like fine line, because it says, yes, use personal insight and emotions. And then I just always go back to memoir writers, and I'm just like, whoa, like that's too much emotion for me. I won't be able to do a memoir. No, thank you. Time out. Where's my therapist? Because this ain't gonna happen. So kudos to, yes, the people that actually do go deep and do dig out all those feelings that they felt and those emotions that they experienced to put that into writing, because I think that is what we want to do as writers. Well, that's what I want to do as a writer, is to connect with people and to make them feel like they are not alone. Let's say, for example, I suffer from depression and someone else suffers from depression. My depression is completely different than someone else's, but something teeny tiny like today I just laid in bed all day might resonate with someone else. It's like when you talked about Justine when she was on this podcast and she was talking about her experience, and you had a friend that said like, all the episodes you're doing is fun and great and all that stuff, but I just really connected with her because what she said resonated to me. And I think that is what we want to do as writers with emotions and with feelings, is to be able to evoke those emotions in the reader. I always say not everybody's going to like your writing, not everybody's going to like your book, but you know what, there is going to be that one person that's going to be like, thank you so much for writing this because I felt things.
This is one of those topics where I feel like memoir writers absolutely have the leg up on everybody else, because if you're writing a memoir, all of it is pretty much your experience, and you have to do some research to make sure you have details right. And that really draws us into this second point, that you want to draw from your knowledge and your experiences. And when you draw from that personal knowledge, that personal experience, you can put things into the book that your reader probably doesn't know about. Like, I have a lot of experience in the sailing industry. I worked for a company that built engines for boats. My husband's been military for years. We've owned boats. I've got my license for sailing in Virginia. And so I know a lot of the terms. I know how to do it, and I'll sprinkle it into my books. I have some readers who are like, what does that word mean? Because they don't know nautical terms and they don't know sailing as well. And so it's nice to be able to put that truth and livelihood into it, but also not to be afraid to seek out new experiences, seek out new knowledge by getting out into the world.
Absolutely.
I know some people even go so far as to be like, well, let me just try it out for a month and see how I physically learn how to do it.
No, it is. I mean, one of my novels that I wrote was about an au pair basically going to the Netherlands, which is literally what I did. I was like, I know what it's like being an au pair in the Netherlands specifically. I know how the system works. I know how the kids are. I know how the journey flows of what I went on. And so then I think that was the easiest novel for me to write, because it was from my personal experience that I just kind of added a little fantasy and romance to it, because romance is fantasy, especially in my life. Yeah. But anyway, so yes, I don't always want to give my characters like your typical job that people have, like a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or something like that. So I do want to explore like different jobs and like unique jobs, I almost want to say, those that aren't like always spoken about and stuff like that. So then I pick something and I'm like, well, I've never done this before and I know even less about this, and I don't always know people who do this specific job. And so that's where, Mr. Google comes in and then I'm like, hey Google, what's this? For example, I'm actually working on a romance suspense right now. Well, one of my
Mhm.
characters is a detective. That is pretty obvious, very commonly used job
Right,
description. But
right.
and then the woman is a hair and makeup artist, and I was like, I've done makeup before and I've done my hair before, but I don't really know anything about that. Luckily, luckily I do have an acquaintance who is a hairdresser, and so I was able to reach out to her to be like, hey, so what's up with this job? Like, what do you do? How do you do it? What equipment do you need? Like, I asked her all these gazillion questions and she answered me beautifully and gave me all these terms. How many of those questions and that information that I got from her do I actually use in my novel? Probably like 5%.
Exactly, right? But this reminds me of the quote from Terry Valentine. She's an award-winning novelist. She came to one of our groups and was reviewing a memoir. Of course, it came from a memoir. And she said, this woman has to know what this feels like. She isn't just doing this off of quick research. She knows what she's talking about. And like, if people feel that in your writing, yeah, you're doing it right. That's what you want them to feel.
Exactly. And the thing is, you don't necessarily have to have been a pilot to be able to write about being a pilot, but someone can definitely see when you've fudged information and when you've like fudged experiences. It's like when people write novels about South Africa, and then I'm just like, where in South Africa were you? Because no. And it's actually so funny. I just finished reading a novel because literally the title was The Rivals in South Africa. I bought the novel because I was like, I want to see how they're going to write about South Africa and whether it's going to be accurate. Because people. And I must admit, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. I was actually quite impressed.
Well, and if you don't think that you can't write something that you don't know very well, go to Brandon Sanderson's book Skyward.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't like YA sci-fi, that's fine. All you have to do is go to the acknowledgments.
Oh.
He doesn't have pilot's license. He doesn't fly. He's a teacher, you know. But the acknowledgments list in Skyward, that most of it is about flying.
Mm-hmm.
And space flying as well, is like a mile long. He has so many people that he talked to and worked with and who worked on the novel with him to make sure it was accurate. It's a great novel, but even a writer as accomplished as that can write something he doesn't know well because he has a passion to know about it. Yeah. And gets the people on board to help him to make sure that it is correct.
And also, I mean, you've talked about it before where you said, okay, I wrote this scene about a medical scene that I wrote, and you actually went to people to be like, hi, you're a doctor. Can you read this and say if it's accurate? Which is great. It's great when you can actually do that, and then people can be like, yeah, that sounds about right, or be like, sorry, pardon, did you fall and hit your head? Like, what's happening here? Okay, so I'm going to jump into the next one. Use your own observations of people and the world. And I 1000% agree with this. And that's why I would recommend to anybody to go travel, go see the world, go experience cultures, go eat scorpions that are in lollipops, because you can gain experience from that and you can gain knowledge from that. But you can also meet people and you can see how someone experienced this something different from the way that you are experiencing it. And it's just such a beautiful way to open your mind as well. Because if you live in a certain way and you live in a certain manner, that is how you're going to keep on writing. But if you want to reach more people and you want more people to learn about what you are writing, because a lot of times I will throw in South African phrases in my novels, or I will have South African food or characters in my novels. And if I take the time and effort to actually learn about other cultures, learn about other people, and I find a way to connect with those people in my writing, then that is a whole different target audience that you're getting.
I tell people, if you're in a funk, go to a cafe, sit there for a while. Observe people, go to a park, do something, and take your laptop or your notebook with you if you want, if you can write in that kind of environment. Some people can't, but you can gain the experience just by being there and going out and watching people. And the old NaNoWriMo website had an option on it that I loved, and I wish that it was back and that somebody did it. I don't know. But they had a spot where you could make yourself a character for other people to use in their books. So you'd go in and you'd talk about some things about yourself, what interesting characteristics or traits that you have. Just to throw some variety of some traits, and then people can scan through it and be like, oh, that's a really good idea for my character that I'm trying to build over here. And a couple of my characters came from that, who are some of my favorite characters that I use. Just talking to other writers about what kind of people do you know? Or relating a character to somebody who you know, feed off their personality and feed off of who they are instead of just relying on your own head all the time.
Yeah, I did an acting in television and film class one semester, and one of our assignments that we had to do throughout the semester was to take a journal, and then we had to sit and observe people. Like, you can look at someone across the hall and you'd be like, what type of person is that? Like, what are they doing sitting there? Like, did their wife just leave them? Or did they just bump their car against someone else? Or did they get a promotion at work? And that was a very helpful and interesting activity. You know, you have friends around you have family around you, and the majority of time, those are the people that you interact with the whole time. And you don't really broaden your experiences or your circle of people and habits and schedules that you are used to. And so to be able to then sit there and think outside the box, in a sense, I think is also a great way to, you know, be a person of the world.
Exactly. And I'm going to kind of combine one of her other points of using realistic settings in with the same thing. While you're out there exploring the world, you can also explore setting and making your setting realistic. Even if you're a high fantasy that's created your own world, there's still real reality in it.
Yeah.
You still have to think about real things and ground your reader so they feel like it's a real world. And like when I was walking around Sweden and just admiring their sidewalks, if you're in the United States, you have never seen cool sidewalks until you've seen Swedish sidewalks. They're pretty awesome. I was admiring their curbs and I thought, you know, these curbs would work really well with this culture I'm building right now because it's so in line with the way that they do things. So I'm totally stealing this.
Yeah.
And so I rolled it into that culture and into that book, that it's there as a detail and it's real life in a fantasy setting.
Very true. Yeah, see, I can't use that as an excuse because I literally write my novels in reality. So, well, I mean, not all the time, because if you look at like a lot of romance authors, like there are so many like small town novels. There are only so many small towns. So a majority of authors, what they would do is they would take a small town that they've been in or that they've been to, and they will just use that as an inspiration for their own little town that they create, which is also another way that you can do that.
Yes, which is lovely.
And if you can't, you know, fly to England to see what York looks like when you're writing a novel about it, that's what Google Maps are for, is what I'm saying.
So one of her other points is to use universal themes through your personal lens. You hear use a universal theme so people can connect with you all the time. Like I hear that all the time. And it's like, well, doesn't that sound formulaic? Yeah, that just sounds like it'll be boring. But I love how she adds through your personal lens. Because the way I have experienced, say, love and war in my life is different than how somebody like Nell has. And so I'm going to portray it a very different way from my perspective, from my experiences, and from the experiences of the people I know and talked about. Like one of my books, I was world building it when everything started in Ukraine. My dad's fiance lives in Ukraine with her kids.
Oh, wow.
And so her experiences, the things she was telling to us and sending to us on a daily basis, especially at the beginning, really snuck into that book because I had to put it somewhere, but also it was so real and so in line with what that book was already doing that it's like, this is a perspective I need to pull in and I need to get out into the world.
Yeah. Well, I think also, I mean, the point of romance is tropes. That's the whole point of romance. And so it can become very redundant when you're like, oh, friends to lovers, or you're like enemies to lovers, or you're like, I don't know, small town, or you're like alpha male, or things like that. Agents always say, no, they want like this trope, but they want a twist on it, or they want this trope, but they want it from a different perspective. When you do take your own personal experience, I mean, the way I feel enemies to lovers or perceive enemies to lovers versus how you perceive them are two different things. And so for me, I could be like an enemies to lovers would be like a wham bam thank you man type of scenario, where your enemies to lovers would be like, no, we are in war and we're enemies, but then secretly we're gonna become lovers. So yes, I think those are good do's for you when you write what you know. So one of the things that she says you should avoid is don't limit yourself to only what you've experienced personally, which is something I feel like we have said numerous times now already, because there's so many different ways to express yourself and to learn and to convey emotion and feeling into your novel without personally having experienced it.
Absolutely. So she also talks about, and this is especially important, oh my goodness, don't overload readers with exposition.
Me snapping my fingers because yes.
Man, absolutely. Because when you've done all this research, done all this world building, put all these things together, and then you just want to put it all in there. And that's okay for a first draft. Like, put it in there in your first draft. If that's what you have to do to get into the scene and to figure out what you're doing and where people are, absolutely put it in there. But when you get into that second draft, you have to recognize exposition.
I 100% agree with that. And I think exposition kind of falls in the same line as backstory. My favorite question to ask someone if I be to read their novel and they're telling me all these lovely things about their character and their life story and their aunt and uncle and all that stuff, my favorite question to ask is, do we need to know this now?
Yes.
It's such a simple question, but I think it can make you think so much about it, because in that moment, you're like, what is the scene about? If you discover what the scene is about, then I feel you can weave out those backstories and the exposition to be like, okay, I probably don't need to use this now. Or you could be like, I want the person to, or the reader to know this, but I could mention half of this sentence in a dialogue that would make it read more active instead of just telling me all these lovely things. And so I think that's also a way that you can not overload your reader with exposition and backstory.
Yes, pick the one thing right now, tease them about what's behind the curtain, like Johnny talked about. I think sometimes as writers, we're afraid that if I don't tell them now, then they're not going to understand things later. And something I've discovered is I'll risk it. I'll cut it. I'll move it later. I'll see what the beta readers say. Sometimes I'll cut it and I'll move it around and they'll be like, this is amazing. I'll be like, okay, that's the proper order to have my information. We're good to go. Yeah. I'm very analytical sometimes.
Which is very ironic because you're a pantser. I'm like, that's very ironic.
Right? Like, to get the words down, I have to be super creative and pantsing and just having fun. But then when I'm done with that, I am analytical and critical about everything. It's true. But then every once in a while, I'll have them highlight something and they'll say, I wish I had this sooner. And I go, okay, so that's a detail that I can move up. It's okay to have it out of order too early or too late and just listen to those beta readers and see how it's coming off to somebody else.
Yeah. Then we dip our toe into don't assume your experience is universally shared, which I think we also kind of talked about. But I would also add to be like, just be mindful that if you do want to write about a South African, go crazy. Like, the world's your oyster, or South Africa is your oyster. But just be kind of accurate in what you're writing. We are a very diverse country, and we have 11 official languages, numerous cultures that we have in this country. And I'm only a part of a culture in this whole country. So the way I see South Africa, the way I experience South Africa, and the way that I grew up in South Africa is my experience. It's my way of living, and it's how I've seen it and done it. Someone else who might literally like be living right next to me might be from a different culture, might be from a different religion, and may have the complete opposite experience of what I've experienced in the country. So you are more than welcome to write about it and what you feel your character experiences it. You just need to have like references and research and concrete evidence to prove why you feel the way you feel, or your character feels the way you feel, or you believe that we all live in huts in South Africa. Then I'm like, okay, if you can prove to me why we do, then that's fine.
So the last thing that she says, and this is one that I want to especially talk about because I disagree with this. Let me know what you think about this. that she says, don't use your writing as therapy. Now, I disagree in this on the premise of you should use it for therapy in your first draft if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
When that first draft is over, then you have to step back and decide, is this a story that was just for me? Or is this a story I want to get out? Then you have to edit it with a mind of not being your therapy.
Yeah.
Because you need to connect with your readers. And so I agree that that final draft that goes out, it should not read like a therapy session or a data dump or whatever in your head you had to get out in that first draft.
Mm.
But you should use writing as therapy if you need to use it for therapy.
Yeah.
You just have to be critical of whether it's for you or for your reader.
I also have like a 50-50 opinion on that one, because everything I write is therapy for me, because apparently I don't have a love life, and so I find therapy in writing the love life that I don't have in real life, in my fantasy life. You write because you want all those feelings on paper, and you want to validate your emotions and your experience and how you see a situation, and you just kind of have to decide, who are you writing for? And that is what target audience is for. I don't know. It's like, don't use writing as therapy. I don't. I use writing as revenge.
Well, there you go. So having talked about all of this, there's a lot of options and ways to be able to write what you know. I hope we've helped to kind of flesh that out in this episode. But especially I want people to remember this can be a scary thing. And even in the article, she says, protect your mental health. We did our episode on protecting your health, and it is so true. And it can be scary, especially if you're writing from a very marginalized perspective. It can be scary to put yourself into that novel and not know how people are going to react. You need to realize, though, that you will have an audience who will support you.
I would like to end this episode with a quote from Jeanette Porter, who is an assistant professor for the Missouri School of Journalism. And she says, people who write out of marginalized identities are aware that their viewpoints are often not heard or even actively discounted or silenced.
And with that, we like to keep it short here, and we want to get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on the paper to write your story.
To write what you know. And if you like what we are doing here and you want to be a part of this community that we have created and see more awesome guests that we have, or just the two of us talking to each other, then go follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Tea and Tales Podcast, and on TikTok and Twitter/X at Podcast Tea Tales. And go to that purple icon on your device and go give us 5 stars so that we can go up, 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 up to the top.
Happy writing.
Bye.